If you had $1 billion, you could build a data center. The strange part is that almost none of that money would go toward the thing everyone pictures inside it. Not the servers, not the chips, not the blinking racks. You could spend the better part of $1 billion on a single windowless building in the middle of nowhere, and then discover that the most valuable thing you own is not the computers at all. It is the power line running into the back of the lot. That is the paradox that runs this entire industry. A data center is the most boring building on Earth. A gray box with no windows, no sign, and no people. And it has quietly become the most valuable, most fought-over real estate on the planet. The richest companies in the world are spending more on these boxes than they spend on almost anything else they do. And the people getting genuinely rich from it mostly do not own a single computer inside them. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what one of these things costs, who actually makes the money, and the single number that decides whether a data center is a license to print cash or a $500 million paperweight. And it comes down to one resource that is suddenly running out. Let us start with what one actually costs, because there is a ladder here, and most people only picture the bottom rung. At the bottom is co-location. You do not build anything. You rent space in someone else's building, measured not in square feet, but in kilowatts. In the big wholesale markets, a slice of powered space now goes for around $184 per kilowatt per month, and that price has been climbing about 13% a year. A few years ago, it was closer to $120. The space did not get bigger, the power got scarcer. The next rung up, you build a real facility. The rule of thumb the industry uses is about $10 to $12 million per megawatt of capacity for a standard build. And here is the first uncomfortable detail. Up to half of that budget is not computing equipment at all. It is the mechanical and electrical guts, the transformers, the switchgear, the backup generators, the cooling. You are not building a computer room. You are building a small power plant that happens to have servers bolted onto the end of it. And then there is the flagship, a modern AI campus, the kind built to train the largest models, the kind that needs liquid cooling because the chips run too hot for air. Those cost north of $20 million per megawatt. And at full scale, a gigawatt-sized AI campus with the land and the power and the equipment runs somewhere between $45 and $55 billion. That is not a typo, and it is not a data center in the way you are imagining one. That is closer to building an airport that only computers are allowed to use. So why would anyone pay it? Because at the very top of this market sits the option that nobody advertises. You do not build the building, and you certainly do not buy the chips. You own the land and the power, and you rent the box to someone who has more money than patience. But here is what nobody comparing these numbers realizes at first. The price of a data center has very little to do with concrete and almost everything to do with geography. The exact same building can be wildly profitable in one county and legally impossible to switch on in another for one reason: power. For 20 years, the center of this universe was a stretch of Northern Virginia called Ashburn in Loudoun County. They call it Data Center Alley. And for a while, it carried something like a third of the world's internet traffic. Land was cheap, fiber was everywhere, and the power just flowed. Then the AI build-out arrived, and the demand for electricity went vertical, and the local utility, Dominion Energy, did something almost unheard of. It started telling some of the most valuable companies on Earth that their power would be delayed, not by weeks, by years. State lawmakers began openly debating whether to slow the whole thing down, so a strange new map emerged. Suddenly, the most important question was not how cheap the land was. It was whether you could get a power connection this decade. And in the constrained markets, the rent stopped behaving like a real estate price and started behaving like a ransom for electricity. A powered building became one of the most valuable objects in the economy. An unpowered one became a very expensive shed. So you understand the ladder, and you understand why the geography matters. Now, how do you actually get hold of one? You have a few real options. The first is to build new. which, as we have just established, is where you spend $500 million and then wait in line behind a utility that may or may not be able to power you. It is the option with the highest ceiling and by far the most ways to lose. The second, and far smarter, is to become the landlord. There is an entire class of company that does nothing but build powered shells and rent them to the giants. They are called data center REITs, and the two names that matter are Equinix and Digital Realty. Equinix alone is worth around $79 billion, more than most of the famous tech companies whose logos you would actually recognize. It pulls in over $8 billion a year, and it plans to spend $4 to $5 billion a year, every year, just to keep building. Digital Realty controls the single largest slice of leased data center power in the United States. Neither of them is trying to win the artificial intelligence race. They are renting out the stadium and letting everyone else fight on the field, but the landlords are only half the story. The reason their rent keeps climbing, the reason a powered building has become something close to a license to print money, is who is doing the renting. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Meta are in the middle of the largest building spree in corporate history. Together, they are spending over $300 billion in a single year on AI infrastructure, a number that has roughly tripled in 3 years and is forecast to keep climbing toward $700 billion. And here is the detail that explains everything. More than 60% of that money is not being spent on chips. It is being spent on power, cooling, and construction. The constraint in this entire industry has quietly moved from the silicon to the socket. Think about what that means. The most sophisticated technology companies on Earth have discovered that their real bottleneck is not genius, it is electricity. And the people who own the electricity and the powered buildings wrapped around it get to charge whatever scarcity allows. That is the version of the story everyone tells at the conference. Here is the part they leave off the slide. Because if the math is this good, why does anyone ever lose? Because there are two enormous costs hiding in the tail, and they are the ones that never make it into the pitch. The first is power, again, but as an operating cost. A data center's electricity bill never stops, and in many deals it is simply passed straight through to the tenant with a markup. That sounds clean until the grid itself becomes the problem. If the utility cannot deliver, your $500 million building generates exactly nothing while the loan payments keep coming. You did not buy a money machine. You bought a very large bet that the power would show up. The second cost is the one that quietly terrifies the people who actually own the chips: obsolescence. The expensive hardware inside these buildings, the AI accelerators that cost tens of thousands of dollars each, do not age like a building. They age like a phone. 3 to 5 years and the cutting edge has moved on, and what you paid a fortune for is now worth a fraction. If you own the computers, you own a melting ice cube. The asset is losing value the entire time it sits there, even when it is working perfectly. But here is the part that nobody pouring concrete in Virginia wants to put in writing. The whole boom rests on one assumption: that the demand for artificial intelligence keeps growing exactly as fast as everyone is now building for. Over $300 billion a year, climbing towards $700 billion, all of it betting that the appetite is bottomless. If that demand so much as pauses, you are left with gigawatts of capacity built on debt in a world that suddenly does not need it. Construction in this business is where fortunes are made, and just as quietly, where they go to die. And that is exactly why the smartest operators have stopped trying to win the part everyone is watching. They do not buy the chips because the chips melt. Many of them do not even build the boxes because the boxes can strand. They buy the two things in this entire system that do not go obsolete and do not get cheaper: the land and the power. A piece of land with a signed agreement for a few hundred megawatts of electricity is now one of the most valuable assets in the country, and it did nothing. It just sat there while the world ran out of power. The REITs that own powered buildings keep raising the rent because the tenants have nowhere else to go. and the utilities and landowners who control the actual electrons are quietly becoming the most important players in a story that everyone thinks is about software. The principle is the one every survivor in this business eventually learns. The money was never in the computers. The computers are the part that gets old. The money is in owning the one thing the computers cannot run without. At the exact moment the world realizes there is not enough of it to go around. You do not get rich owning the servers. You get rich owning the building they have to sit in and the power they have to plug into and charging admission to the future. For 20 years, these gray boxes were treated as plumbing, boring, invisible infrastructure that nobody thought about, sitting on cheap land nobody wanted. And then artificial intelligence arrived with a bottomless hunger for electricity, and overnight the most boring building in the economy became the most strategically valuable because it sits on top of the one resource the whole future is now fighting over. So here is the question. If someone handed you a powered data center tomorrow, fully leased, quietly printing money, would you keep it and become the landlord the entire industry has to come to? Or would you sell it at the top, take the cash and get out before anyone finds out how much of this was built on a bet? Tell me in the comments which kind of owner you would actually be. I genuinely want to know.